first thing I'm going to be doing is tearing this main stuff off, these covers. There's two 10mm bolts right here. It's a 10mm bolt holding the clutch on. And then there's two 8mm bolts holding the chain cover on. For those of you that don't have a lot of experience with chains and stuff like that, you're going to want to find the master link. It's going to have a C kind of shaped clip. The best tool I've found for putting one on and taking one off is just a flat blade screwdriver. All I do is go to the end, press down, be careful like that. It's going to shoot it somewhere on the floor, so make sure you keep up with that. You can push the master link out. Take the master link washer off. Now your chain will come right off. Since I took that bolt out already, you're going to be able to slide that clutch right out. This clutch is probably pretty burnt up. I've ran the crap out of it for probably a year and a half now. The only thing I've ever done to it is change the oil periodically just to, keep it running solid. So next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and pop these bolts off. They're 10mm on the bottom, and they are 13mm, I believe, on the top. The next thing we're going to do is loosen this screw and this screw, just two Phillips screws, and we're going to make sure we keep up with our spring because we may need that again. I've already loosened these, so I'm just going to slip this throttle cable right out. It just runs right up to my handle, so I'm going to lay it to the side. Set the spring to the side, and we're going to have the same situation down here. Okay, now that that's all unbolted and loose, the next thing we're going to disconnect is the kill switch. Now if you don't know how that works, it's two wires coming from the kill switch up here at the top of the frame. All it's doing is grounding out your coil, so it's putting basically it's not able to spark because the spark from the coil is like grounding out to the body of the motor. So it looks like that's going to be an 8mm bolt. Alright, now that our kill switch is unhooked, our chain's unhooked, the motor's good to go. I'm going to put this bolt back in a little bit just so I have it. Alright, we'll set this motor out. So this is the 65 tooth sprocket we're going to be replacing the 75 tooth with. Came with some hardware. Looks like it came with a master link and a little wrench. Here's the 12 tooth 3/4 inch clutch. And if I didn't cover it earlier, the Coleman motors, even the 200cc ones, come with a 5/8 crankshaft, which is a problem for running a torque converter, and it's kind of a problem for finding parts because most stuff generally uses a 3/4, and I would recommend doing so. I'm not sure if you could swap a 3/4 crank into a Coleman 200. They look identical, so I'm not sure. It's something I just have to test sometime. Here's going to be my exhaust and my muffler. I watched a dyno video, and the guy actually got 1 horsepower more by having the muffler on. Here is a air filter we're going to be doing. This is like a little CNC billet intake mouth. It just widens everything, lets it get a little bit more flow in. I do know some of them are like milled out right in here so that the nut sets further down, so we'll see how this one fits. Altogether, the whole stage 1 kit and the sprocket right here is less than $100. And this is a Carb jet kit. Now, the thing I will tell you about this jet kit is the most important piece, really, in my opinion, is this 140 emulsion tube. What it has is a larger hole down here at the bottom. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove these plastic tags. We're going to take this air cover off. So we're not going to be using any of that. You can save this stuff in case you run into a stock build or anything that you might need, but for the most part it's easier just to buy a $20 kit. So I'm going to take my impact gun and a 10mm. I'm just going to pop these 2 bolts right off. What we are going to do now is pull this main fuel line off right here. It's just a simple band clamp. See if I can show y'all up close of that. So this band clamp right here. I'm going to grab some needle nose. Just like that, and we're pretty much unhooked. Now, the only thing you're gonna have left at this point is also like a little bush in here and a gasket that you wanna be careful of. I'll be removing these bolts. I believe they're 8mm bolts also, and we're just gonna set that whole assembly off. If you feel like you need to take a picture of it, go ahead, but it's really nothing to stress. Just wanna slide this out, pull this out, and then you have this little spring right here. What we'll have to do, I think they make plates for these. I've never bought one to do more like a throttle cable style, but what I normally do is run a spring off the case right here that kind of keeps like tension retained on my throttle. That way you get like the normal throttle blip of a dirt bike. So now that this is out of the way, we're gonna hold on to those gaskets just so they don't go anywhere. I'm just gonna set this carb to the side. Alright, so now we're going to rotate the motor around to this side. You're going to see 2 10mm bolts right here. We're going to take a 10mm wrench. But I got this one out of the way. Set it to the side. We'll go ahead and pull this gas tank off. Real quick, I'm gonna go ahead and pop this exhaust off. It's just 2 nuts right here. I believe they are either 13 or 14. Yep, so they're 13. So this is pretty much trash. You're probably never gonna use this. I keep a couple of them laying around just in case somebody had a problem or was working on a stock Predator and it went on, say, like a piece of equipment and they just needed a factory muffler. But like I said, this stuff's pretty useless. You know, the exhaust and the intakes are like 20 bucks a piece. So most of the time you're gonna wanna upgrade that anyway. We got our motor a little bit closer to stripped down right now. We're gonna rotate around here. This is the governor assembly and how it works inside. You'll see here in a minute, but we're gonna go ahead and break this nut loose. Thinking that's a 10mm. Okay, so all this stuff's gonna be trash. You're not gonna need anything governor related. There's a little hairpin clip right here. We're gonna grab the needle nose pliers, grab it. Just like the thing that holds your pin and your reese hitch. Now we can come straight up off the spline shaft right here with this bracket here for the governor. And one thing you are going to want to save though is your springs, especially this spring. This is probably what we're going to use for throttle retention. That way we get like we don't get a hung throttle, but we also get like that quick blip. Also, you're gonna wanna save these linkages, because what we're gonna end up doing is making our own custom linkage so that we don't have to buy any type of throttle plate or custom adapter for that. So springs and linkages are the only thing. This is absolutely trash, and so is the bolt that held it on. All right, the next thing I'm gonna do is take this throttle assembly plate off. Now, I'd have to look at some of my other ones real quick to remember exactly how I modify these, but I believe I normally cut right around this line right here that you're seeing. I cut it straight off. That way it exposes the whole top of the carburetor. It gives you more working room and allows you to run a linkage directly from, like, say, this nut or this plate right down into the top of the carb. Right here, this governor shaft, you can probably tell it goes up and down. You can push it really far down. The easiest thing I find to do right now while the motor is not open, really, like the intake and exhaust ports are open, I'm not worried about that. Nothing's gonna get in them as it sets right now. What I'm gonna do is go ahead and cut this off flush with a grinder wheel. All right, guys, let's pull this up. You will see the governor rod tries to fall down into the hole, but you cannot really take it out without cutting it. You may be able to get it just right where it would, but we're gonna cut it just so we don't have any problems with it. Okay, so I'm just gonna prop it like this for a second so y'all can kind of see what I'm doing. Gonna take that 10mm. Gonna take all these case cover bolts loose. I will tell you, if you're super into spray painting your motors and stuff like that, now is the time to clean this case cover really well and shoot it with something. I'll tell you what I've had the best luck with is like caliper paint from Rust-Oleum. It bonds to anything as long as it's got like a fairly clean surface, but realistically it'll bond even to a dirty, greasy caliper as long as you do a little bit of cleaning. We're gonna set those bolts aside. Now these 4 bolts are where your torque converter will bolt if you're going that route. On my frame, being that it's a 100, I would have to raise the motor up for it to clear because the torque converter sits at a low angle like that. We're not gonna worry about that right now. That will be something to do in the future possibly, but right now we're just gonna go ahead and dive right into this case. Okay, so now that the bolts are out of the case, the best thing I find to take it off with is just a rubber mallet. You don't wanna drive a screwdriver down in there and damage the sealing surface or anything like that, especially with this being like aluminum. It's pretty soft to cut into, and if you make a divot in there, you're most likely gonna leak oil. I will tell you, a lot of guys will tell you to take it off like this and then reuse the gasket. You can see that I was able to keep the gasket since it's a fresh one, and you can see there's a little bit of oil in there. That's just like probably from the manufacturer to keep it from doing any like rusting or corrosion inside. But we pretty much have like a nice clean sealing surface here. All I'll do is like Scotch-Brite it lightly or something. We don't want to change the level of the mating surface or anything like that, but just a little Scotch-Brite will clean it right up. So you can see there's some oil right here on this gasket. Now these gaskets, I have a couple of these laying around. Preferably, I don't use them. I almost never use these gaskets. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this gasket. I feel certain that if I used it and I torqued it back like I planned to, that it probably would not leak, but there's a much higher chance of this leaking than if I just use some great RTV silicone. And that's what we will be using when we put this motor back together. I'll set this to the side for future use just in case. I want you to pay attention right here when I rotate this motor around. Gonna be a little bit difficult. I may have to pop the spark plug out. Okay. So right here, there's a blue line. That's probably from the factory. Let me see if I can zoom in on that for y'all. So you see there's a dot here and a dot here. All you have to do to time these motors is line these two dots up. That is absolutely it. That's all you have to do. There's no tricks to it. But one thing you will need to pay attention to is your valves are up here in the top of the motor. Let me zoom out a little bit. Your valves are right here, overhead valves. They have a rocker assembly and a push rod coming down to these like flat tappet lifters, I guess you would call them. So what we're gonna do to take the cam out is we're just simply gonna lift it right out. No trick to it. So you have your two lobes, your intake and exhaust lobes. We'll set this to the side. I will tell you, if you've never done anything besides like a stock Predator or maybe like a stage 1 like I'm doing here, putting a cam in these motors will wake them up almost unbelievably. Now here's your lifters. They're these little flat, like pancake looking surfaces. They rod those cam lobes, and that's what opens and closes your valves. And then right down inside of here, I'll lift the motor to show y'all. Down there in the bottom, those two bolts, they look like 8 millimeters. That is your oil, low oil sensor. That is what will cut this motor off and give you problems if you don't take it out. And that's why this wire comes through the side of the motor right here. So we're gonna create an opening in the side of the motor. So we are gonna seal that back. It's not real hard to seal back. It's not gonna be anything to stress. And you're gonna have the same situation with the governor arm that I ground off at the top. You're gonna have a hole in the top of the case that we are gonna either, well, there's a lot of options there. So you can tap the hole, but by tapping the hole, you're creating metal shavings. So in my opinion, you would at least wanna grease the tap really well. Now what I've had really good luck with, if you got a lot of stuff laying around, like these little bolts here, a lot of times after I get the governor out, I will find a bolt that's just a little bit tight. I'll silicone it and I'll just tighten it right into the hole. Once that silicone sets, you have no problems with that sealing. I did that on a 20-something horsepower build, ran it hard, absolutely no problems. So, you know, if you're building an absolute like beast of a motor shooting for 40 horsepower on a single cylinder, yeah, maybe go ahead and tap the hole. But if you're watching this video, you're probably not gonna be doing that. So what I'm gonna do next is go ahead and take this oil sensor out with these two 8 millimeters. Now there's quite a few connectors here. What I'm gonna do is just kind of pop this little connector open. May break it, not really worried about it because I'll probably get rid of all that, but here's the wire for that sensor. We're gonna unplug that there. Gonna go ahead and cut that off. Let me grab my wire cutters real quick. So now that we can see it, see what we're doing, we're just gonna come right here and we're just gonna cut this yellow wire. That's trash unless you just wanna use that connector for something. Now we're gonna lift the oil sensor out, and all we're gonna do is just pull on it just like that. It's gonna come right out. You can probably hear that rattle. That's how it tells it's just like a little float setup. That's absolute trash. Even if you're not gonna do anything else I'm showing you, at least take this out so that you don't have problems with your motor cutting off. If you can see that arm down inside here, this is the governor arm. This is what I cut the top off of. So now I can just wiggle it back and forth. It is really long, and that's why I pull it all the way up before I cut it. Now you'll see I'm getting close to the crankshaft on that, so that's why it barely comes out. Might take this gas tank bolt and give it one more tap. Okay, so there we go. So now we're kind of starting to come out. Okay, so we fell right through. Governor arm's completely out. That's trash. Now I'm going to rotate this so that you can see. So that plastic gear down in there is your governor gear. That's what controls it from going over, I think, like 3,600 RPMs. Also, mind you, try to keep these lifters up just in place. You can put the cam back in at this point if you want, but we're going to leave it out for right now. The only way to remove this is to literally beat it with a flat blade screwdriver. I've tried pliers, I've tried everything. Beating it out is simply the most effective, quickest way possible. I'm going to get a wide one and a skinny one. And then you'll notice there's two metal tabs, and then there's just a center plastic cap. Let me pull that out. This plastic cap sits in between two metal tabs right here, and they kind of close around it. It's got a washer on the bottom of it right here, so you want to make sure you get that out and it doesn't stay inside your motor. Now, you can kind of see down in there at the very bottom, there's really nothing holding it in but a metal ring at this point. It's a little small metal ring, and that's all we're gonna try to break off the shaft. We're gonna basically drive that metal ring down the side of the shaft into the plastic gear. And once it like comes off the shaft, this whole gear assembly is gonna slide right out. The biggest thing you wanna make sure is once you take this out, is there's another flat washer in the bottom. And if you don't remove it, it will end up spinning around in here and breaking something. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and slip the cam back in so that I don't have any more issues with those falling out. I'm going to rotate this motor to a point where I can see the timing dot, and then I have a timing dot here. Now these are angle gears instead of straight cut. You'll see those inside of like Honda transmissions like mine. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drop it, and you're going to see that I'm one tooth off. So all I'm going to do is lift up, realign it, and now we're perfectly timed for the intake and exhaust stroke. So now that that's back in place and I don't have to worry about anything slipping out with the valves, we're going to go ahead and beat this governor out. So I'm going to simply just take a screwdriver. I'm going to go right down at the base of the shaft. It's really hard to see, and I'm not going to be able to show you all the little ring, but you will see the little C-ring looking piece. It almost looks like what's on a keychain where you can kind of pry them offset. So that's exactly what we're going to do on the bottom of this governor. We're going to get this big screwdriver lined up. I'm going to take my ball peen hammer so I get a little bit more force. And I'm just going to give it some solid taps all the way down. Now in here I can already see that I've busted the ring kind of off to the side like I want to. So I'm just going to give it a few more taps here. We'll see if we make some more progress. You'll notice that I'm kind of cutting into the plastic gear also. So we'll line this back up. And we're just going to do this kind of all the way around. You want to just be careful, obviously, not to hit your crank or your camshaft or anything. But there's a gear on the crankshaft down here at the bottom, and that's what the governor rides on, and that's what limits those low RPMs. It looks like the ring is off the governor except on this side, so we'll try to drive it back down some more. And I think that's it. I think it's pretty much off and out. Yep. So I'm able to move the gear around a lot here. I'm just going to get the screwdriver down at the base of it and give it a twist. I'll just kind of show y'all what's going on. So that gear down there in the bottom, it's a little bit hard to see, I apologize, but it's kind of just come right out the top now. So I'm going to reach in, pull this plastic gear right off this little aluminum shaft in the case, and that's the governor. I'm gonna grab my Harbor Freight pick set here. I've got a couple of different hooked style ones. So now I'm gonna go inside here where I can see. I can see the washer start lifting. I'm under the washer. Now once I'm at the top like that, I'm just gonna kind of reach in, grab it by hand, slip it off the shaft, and you can take it out of the case with a pick. And that's all we were working with, is just this one washer right here. That's what will ruin your motor if you forget it, so make sure you get that out. Okay, so now that this is all pulled out, the governor assembly is completely removed from this Predator 212. What I'll do next is go ahead and clean this mating surface. Now, right now I've got like an oily rag, so I'm gonna get the brunt of the oil off of it. I'll make sure my motor's in time real quick before I put it back together, just so we don't have to worry about that later on. Because the last thing you want to do is silicone your side case back in or torque it down with the gasket, either one, whichever you prefer, and then have to open it back up. What I'm going to do next, I'm going to go ahead and pull my gloves off, get a Scotch-Brite and some denatured alcohol, and I'll be right back to wipe this case off. Alright, so the motor's timed, both mating surfaces are clean. So the next thing we're going to do is break out some gray RTV 100% silicone. That's what we're going to be applying a thin layer of on here. And then we're going to drop the case down on everything, and we're going to torque all these bolts in a star pattern. What you can do, once we get this torqued, we'll take the rag and we'll wipe down the outside. Whatever squeezes out, we'll get that cleaned up as well. But we're just gonna go ahead and take the case, drop it on the crank. Now we'll line up those holes, and it should line up those dowel pins. The next thing I'm gonna do is just take this rubber mallet, give it a few taps all the way around. And I'd say we're pretty seated, so I'll go ahead and take these bolts and drop them in. But we're gonna start right here. I'm gonna hold the engine real good. I got it set to 204 inch-pounds, and we're just gonna do a pull until right there we get a click. So don't over tighten them. It's really important you follow torque specs. I know it may not seem like enough like quench down on something, but it is. That's why they give us those numbers. So make sure you pay attention to that stuff. Same with the head. I kind of do the same process. If I have the head off, say I was gonna pull the piston, do rings or something like that, or a different piston, what I would do is I would take all the head bolts out. Should be like 4 of them. I pop the head off, do whatever work I need to do, whether it was shaving the head down or something for compression. Then I take copper gasket spray. I'd spray both sides of the head gasket, let it tack up, a thin layer of silicone on both sides, and I go ahead and torque it down for its torque spec. That's what I did on my 20 horsepower build, and it worked fine. So now we're just gonna clean up this little bit of RTV on the outside of the case. Just keep everything looking clean. So what we're gonna do is just go ahead and pop this bowl off. It's just another 10mm screw. Right here I've got the jets laid out on the table. I'll show you all those in a second. They get referred to as a couple different ways. Like if you look at them on Amazon, it'll be like 0.36 and stuff like that, but it's a 140 emulsion tube, and the jets are labeled 85, 90, and 95. So what we're gonna do Let's go ahead and take this off. This is your bowl. This is your float. And down here in the center is your main jet. That's where we're going to be swapping, and below that is the emulsion tube. You can see how easy this pin just comes out. I guess I'll go ahead and just slip it out for y'all. It's just this one pin, just in case yours falls apart and you can't figure it out. And then there's your needle valve. And then that's the hole your needle valve seats in. It's got like a sharp little tip, and that little tip is what seals off that brass little seat right there. So we'll set this to the side. You want to be careful of your O-ring right here. And you may have to modify a screwdriver. I have this one that I've ground the like little sharp points off of, so it'll slip right down in here. And then we're just gonna back that jet right out of there. Okay, I think it's out. Okay, so the emulsion tube fell right out and the jet fell right out. So I'm gonna set the stock jet to the side for a moment and show you all the difference in these emulsion tubes. Try zooming in. Okay, so can you see, let's see if you can see the hole that's in this one, that black hole. And you notice there's just little tiny holes in this one. So this one's gonna provide you way more flow than this one is. The next thing I'm gonna do is tip the carburetor back over. I'm gonna drop the emulsion tube right back in here. So that's all we got to do to modify the carb. So I'm going to drop this float and this needle valve right back in here. I'll just slip my pin right back through this little bracket. You just got to make sure you line it up. Yep, there it goes. It just kind of floats in the middle there. So just get it to a good kind of point, and then you just want to put your bowl drain kind of off to the side where you'll be able to access it later. You can see the jet down in there. So this is how it sets on the motor. So I'm going to offset my drain off to the side so it won't be a problem later. Now before I forget, since we're going to be waiting on some time for this silicone to dry, I'm going to go ahead and plug this hole up right here. I've got a spare bolt. It kind of is just a little snug going in, and I can kind of just screw it right in. So what I'm going to do is just apply some silicone all around the threads here. Give it a little wipe. When that sets up in 24 hours, that's going to be sealed super tight too. That's all we need to plug that governor hole, and that bolt's low profile enough it's not going to affect anything else. The next thing we're going to do is remove this back wheel and this back axle bolt. So it's a 14 millimeter on this side and a 17 on this side. Hey everybody, we're back in the shop today. The Predator motor has set overnight. All that silicone is going to be cured. Everything's going to be ready for oil. So we're going to go ahead and get this motor put together, back on the frame. And I'm going to run to the gas station, grab some gas, some non-ethanol, and then it'll be time to do some riding. start it by hand. Luckily this one's going right in, so not a big deal. Alright, so we're bottomed out, so we're going to do the same setup again. We're going to double nut this stud. And at the moment I'm still just using the factory nuts. Alright. That's going to be my first cut. And then I'm going to want to follow that up. So if you can see right here, I went right behind this hole and I'm going to go straight across. Now on the next part, I'm going to come down into this valley right here and I'm going to follow that valley. Okay, so after modifying the bracket, this is what it looks like. I didn't follow this line, I ended up going at the top ridge so I could just make a clean straight line across. Okay, so I took my die grinder and I smoothed all this right here so it's not sharp anymore. So once this is bolted on, what's basically got to happen is the throttle cable is going to go into here and attach right here to this arm, just kind of like the old one used to. And then this is going to be our throttle assembly. See, it's already got some spring tension here, so I may not have to do a return spring down to the case, but I will have to make a linkage out of our old linkage here that's going to connect into here and drop straight down into the throttle. My 10mm, kind of hold this in place, start tightening this down now that our bracket's tightened, and we're going to hold our carb closed with our finger at the same time. We're going to take the ground wire off the kill switch. Yeah, so we're just going to go on top because this eyelet's a little bit bigger than it needs to be. Okay, so our ground wire is hooked up, and then this is our coil wire up to the kill switch. So plug it in, we're good to go. Now the handlebars will control whether the motor runs or not. Here I got this inline filter here. A lot of times these will say they flow a certain direction. Yep, so it's got an arrow pointing down, so we need to make sure that it's feeding this way. Check the tension, that's literally perfect. I'm gonna tighten this back corner up. Okay, so now the motor is definitely not going anywhere. We got a good amount of slack in the chain right here. Everything's good. We're gonna go ahead and go for a first start. Alright guys, I just got off the bike. I took it around the neighborhood and I'm gonna tell y'all what, this thing is smoking fast. It's, I'd say, at least double the speed that it was